Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video of apologist Grady McMurtry. I may turn this into a series if there's enough interest, as this is the first 20 minutes of a talk that's a bit over an hour long, but I also might not, depending on how the other three parts of this talk go. Now, because this one is a longer one, I will be skipping around a bit more than usual, so as always, feel free to check the original video to make sure I'm not missing anything crucial. So without further ado, let's go!
Hello. I'm Dr. Grady McMurtry with Creation and Worldview Ministries located in Orlando, Florida. I used to be an evolutionist, but now I'm a creationist, and I was a trained evolutionist from birth, really.
You can tell from his wording that his education isn't really relevant to the subject of evolution. It took some hunting, but I found that his Bachelor of Science degree is in forestry management. I couldn't find exactly what his master's degree was in, but it was at the State University of New York's College of Environmental Science and Forestry, so I imagine it also had to do with forestry. And while I'm almost certain that he did learn about evolution during these studies, it would likely not have been the main focus. But he introduced himself as Dr. Grady, so surely he took his studies further? Perhaps his PhD is an irrelevant topic? Sadly, no. He is a Doctor of Divinity in Christian Apologetics. So, translated into laypeople English, he's a doctor of convincing people to take make-believe seriously. Okay, so a trained evolutionist with a doctorate in the apologetics sector of divinity. Let's see how good his evolutionist training is. And I wonder if he also considers himself a gravitationalist, since he probably believes gravity is a thing, or a germist, as he probably accepts the germ theory of disease. I'd be willing to bet that no, these are not words that he uses.
But I became a Christian at the age of 27. I became a creationist at the age of 28.
There you have it. This creationist implicitly admits that Christianity is not necessarily in conflict with evolution, so you can still accept science and be a Christian. I personally don't see much of a point in that, but to each their own.
The various theories of evolution declare that the Earth and the universe are billions of years old.
Well, your evolutionist training seems to have failed you. I assume here that when you say these various theories of evolution, you're doing that Kent Hovind thing where you try to group all sorts of different sciences into the umbrella term evolution, because the colloquial use of the word can just mean change over time. So any science that involves things changing that you don't like can be dismissed by calling it evolution, even if it's unrelated.
Evolutionists say that we are just the result of a cosmic accident.
Not necessarily. You yourself said that you spent a year as a Christian before becoming a creationist. When you were a Christian who accepted evolution, did you think it was an accident, or did you think it was guided by God? There are lots of people out there who accept evolution and think that there's some supernatural guiding force behind it and that it is no accident. You can't tell us that you were an evolutionist Christian for a year and then seconds later start using the term evolutionist as a synonym for atheist. But yeah, atheists generally would tend to agree with the general principle there, even if they would take issue with the wording, that there is no ultimate purpose to life.
That we are just thinking animals without specific design or purpose.
Yep. And the benefit that comes with that is that we get to choose our own purpose. We don't have to live with an external purpose that is thrust upon us by a god.
In school, most of us were taught that life began by random chance chemical reactions.
Kind of. The chemical reactions themselves were random chance, but once self-replication started, then natural selection provided a guiding force that helped promote the random changes that were more helpful, so it's not entirely a random process.
Yet when we see the beauty of the Earth, we see the complexity of the living organisms that occupy it. Can we really believe that this is all just an accident?
Well, beauty is completely subjective. Things were not made specifically for us to find beautiful. We find them beautiful because of how they relate to us. And as far as the complexity of living organisms is concerned, there are plenty of things in nature that are complex. Our sun is a sustained fusion reactor that literally smashes atoms together so hard that they become a different substance. Like, imagine taking two chunks of coal and pushing them together so hard that they become one chunk of magnesium. That's what the sun does, only with hydrogen and helium. Oh, and it's more complex than just that, as the theory of relativity comes in and is actually what provides most of the energy for us. The energy that we get from the sun is mostly because the mass of a helium atom, which is 2 protons, 2 neutrons, and 2 electrons, is slightly less than the mass of 4 hydrogen atoms, which are 1 proton with 1 electron. This difference in mass is given off as energy, as described by the E=mc² equation. Also, I have no idea where the neutrons come from in this whole thing. They're probably protons converting to neutrons when bombarded with gamma radiation that reverses the polarity of the warp coils. Yeah, I could look it up, but the complexity of this non-living system is just too much to wrap my brain around. And even if I grant you the argument appears to be that complexity requires a designer. A god is infinitely more complex than the living systems that we have here in the natural realm, so clearly this god must have been designed. So who designed the designer? Ah, but God is the ultimate designer. He has no need of being designed. That's called special pleading, where the specific principles that you are applying to something are ignored when discussing something else. So in this case, the assumption that complexity requires a designer is ignored when talking about this necessarily more complex designer.
Evolutionists say that the Earth is, in fact, millions and billions of years old. First of all, you have to understand that they have no proof for this whatsoever.
Nope. We sure don't have plate tectonics, or geographical strata, or distant starlight, or radiometric dating, or archaeology, or paleontology, or evolution itself. And yes, evolution counts as evidence that the Earth is old. Evolution happens, and in order to evolve from simpler organisms that we see in the ancient past, billions of years are required. So evolution does count as evidence for an old Earth, but we knew the Earth was more than a few thousand years old way before Darwin showed up. Throughout the 1700s, the age of the Earth was estimated as being between 75,000 years and a few 100,000 years. Through the first half of the 1800s, as we learn more about geology, the age estimates started reaching the millions of years. So millions of years were not invented in order to support evolution. It was actually the discovery that the Earth is at least a few million years old that allowed evolution to be a consideration in the first place.
You see, in spite of anything and everything you can show an evolutionist that evolution is not true, they will simply respond by saying, give me enough time and anything can happen.
Anything that is actually possible? Yes, but that's not the default response when presented with creationist arguments. Well, maybe there are people out there who accept evolution without really understanding it who would say that when presented with the arguments, but people who have a basic understanding of evolution are probably already familiar with the various holes in the creationist arguments and would respond by pointing out those holes rather than just saying that anything can happen given enough time.
Is there anything about a rock that will tell you how old it is? Is there anything about the size, feel, shape, smell, taste, weight, mass, specific gravity, density, chemical composition? Is there anything about a rock that will tell you how old it is? And of course the answer is
yes.
No.
No?
There's absolutely nothing about a rock that will tell you how old it is.
If it is a type of rock that cannot be absolutely dated using radiometric dating techniques, then no, there is nothing that will directly tell you how old it is if it's not in the context of the location of that rock's discovery. However, when looking at a rock in its original location, there are methods that can be used to give this rock a date based on context. For instance, when looking at rock layers, we know that the lower layers are older than the higher layers. This is the law of superposition, and this law has never been observed to be violated. So at the very least, when looking at a rock in the wild, without bringing radiometric dating in, we can already tell which rocks are older than other rocks. We can also use our knowledge of how different rocks formed to tell approximately how much older the lower layers are than the younger layers. These are the methods that were used in the 1700s that got us to the ages for the Earth of at least 75,000 years, and the more we learned about geology, the farther back the upper age limit for the Earth was pushed. You are getting the cause and effect backward here. We didn't push the age of the Earth back to defy the Bible and then try to figure out how to make it look old with geology. Instead, geology made the Earth look old, so we accepted the fact that it is old once we could measure how old it is.
As a matter of fact, I can go outside right now, pick up any rock I choose to. I can claim any age I want to for it. You may disagree with me, but you cannot prove me scientifically incorrect.
As previously stated, that depends on the type of rock. If it's an igneous rock, then yes, it can be dated using radiometric dating techniques. It can also be radiometrically dated if it's metamorphic rock, but the margin for error will be much higher with metamorphic rock because metamorphism is a very slow process, so different grains of the same rock can result in different ages. The error bars are so high as to make radiometric dating of metamorphic rock functionally useless, but if we're talking about a rock that you take out of its stratigraphic context and insist on us determining an age for it, we can date part of your rock and give an approximate date range. And because of the nature of sedimentary rock, being smaller pieces that are cemented together, radiometric dating would only give an age of the individual grains of sediment rather than the rock as a whole, so you could wind up with vastly different ages for grains of the same sedimentary rock. Now this can be useful, as a sedimentary rock cannot be older than its youngest zircon, but by itself we have no way of knowing if we actually got the youngest zircon. If, however, there is a layer of rock that is positioned in a way that we know it to be younger than the sedimentary rock, then even if that layer is also sedimentary, we can date its zircon crystals and use these measurements to hone in on the actual date range. And of course, in the real geologic column, there are layers of igneous rock thrown in that help us get even closer to the correct answers.
Now people will say, well, you know, the Earth is old. It all came from a Big Bang. Supposedly this Big Bang occurred some perhaps 20 billion supposed years ago.
Close. It's actually 13.8. You're only off by 6.2 billion years, which is only 1.8 billion years older than the entire solar system. But you know what they say, close only counts in horseshoes, hand grenades, and flatulence. Though I'm pretty sure that if any of those things were off by 6.2 billion years, they also wouldn't count. Except maybe flatulence. I know some people whose fart stink seems to linger for about that long.
But is the Earth and the universe really 20 billion years old, or can you really trust the Bible to tell you the truth that it was created just 6,000 years ago?
Another statement that displays this guy's complete ignorance on this topic. Nobody is claiming that the Earth is as old as the universe. The Earth is about 4.4 billion years old, and the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. Universe came first, then Earth. Maybe I'm being overly pedantic pointing this out, but you can't be up there claiming to be able to overturn the majority of modern science and then get such basic things as the age of the Earth and how that compares to the age of the universe so drastically wrong. But this is a good point to digress into an example of scientists getting answers they didn't like and changing their views instead of making stuff up to make their answers fit their views. So, one way of measuring the age of the universe is to measure the Hubble constant and calculate the age from the constant. I'm not going to go into detail about how you do this, but there's a link in the description for anyone interested. Until the 1950s, the Hubble constant was essentially a hypothetical value, as we were not able to measure it with much accuracy before then. In 1958, Alan Sandage became the first astronomer to accurately measure it. Then from his measurement, the age of the universe was calculated at approximately 14 billion years. However, at the time, he had measured star ages that were in excess of 20 billion years. Both of these numbers could not be right. Astronomers spent several years honing not only their measurement abilities, but also the various models of how the universe works, and rather than make up some reason why the Hubble constant would allow for a 20 billion year old universe to fit their previous beliefs, we got better at measuring both stellar ages and the Hubble constant and have adjusted our ideas about how the universe works based on our more accurate measurements.
Now, that's a piece of natural opal from Australia. This is a piece of man-made opal from Australia. Under an electron scanning microscope, you can't tell the difference. But this artificial man-made opal was grown in that jar right there.
Yes, we can artificially make opal fairly quickly if we set it up in a lab setting and give it the perfect conditions that you would never find in nature. Good thing the age of the Earth is in no way dependent on how long it takes opals to form given perfect conditions.
But evolutionists say it takes millions of years to form diamonds. Well, first of all, though, you really know that that's not true, because if you think about it, you know that we've been able to make industrial-grade diamonds for many, many years. It takes a few months. We simply subject carbon to heat, pressure, and so forth. But these are crude diamonds in the sense that they're not gem-quality diamonds. They are diamonds, but they're only used for abrasives and grinding and so forth. But are you aware that in 2003, we found out how to make pure, super hard diamonds in only a matter of minutes?
I was not aware that it could be done in minutes. Last I heard it was a few hours, but I don't exactly keep close tabs on the synthetic diamond industry. But you're tilting at windmills here. We don't really know how long it takes diamonds to form naturally. The scientific sources I found all explain how the diamonds likely formed, but were silent about how long the process takes, or flat out admitted that we're not sure. The only other sources I found did indeed claim that diamonds take not just millions of years, but billions of years to form. But do you know what all of those sources had in common? They're jewelers trying to sell you on the idea that natural diamonds are a rare treasure that requires spending extra money on, and you should avoid the cheaper synthetic diamonds, even though it takes a professional jeweler to be able to distinguish between natural and artificial. But all this is beside the point, because even if the claim that it takes diamonds millions of years to form naturally were actually being made, the fact that we can't do it much faster is irrelevant for the same reasons that it's irrelevant for opals. Now, I'm skipping his whole section on gold because it is again irrelevant. I have never heard anyone claim that the Earth is old because of how long it takes gold deposits to form. Come to think of it, I've never heard anyone claim that about diamonds or opals either. Oh well, live and learn.
And what about stalactites, stalagmites? I mean, doesn't that take millions and millions of years to form? I mean,
depends on what the rocks of the cave are made out of and how much carbon it gets dissolved in the water. It can be quick. And again, I have never heard anyone say that the Earth must be old because of stalactites or stalagmites. Now, I would just like to point out that in the part that I'm about to skip, he once again demonstrates his ignorance on anything to do with geology as he uses the terms limestone and basalt interchangeably. Limestone is a sedimentary rock, basalt is igneous. They are not interchangeable in the slightest. So, once again, skip!
And evolutionists will tell you, well, the polar ice caps contain perhaps a quarter million years of accumulated ice and snow and so forth. As a matter of fact, they will tell you that you can see the little lines in the polar ice caps and say, you can see 220,000 lines there and so forth.
It's not just about the lines, it's also about the bubbles of atmosphere and dust that get trapped in the layers. We can directly date the atmosphere in this case. And with the dust, we can coordinate layers between geology fields, so if you find a layer in an ice core with a certain type of volcanic ash, you can then match this up with core samples taken from the ocean floor which contain an identical type of volcanic ash.
First of all, that's not true. It's actually a lie.
Yeah, the way you said it, it is a lie. Well done pointing out the problems with your own straw man.
I want you to think with me for just a moment. How many of you have opened up a refrigerator freezer door and you've seen two ice cubes flowing together in the middle of the freezer?
I generally keep my ice cubes in trays, so that doesn't happen for me. Maybe it's different for those of you who have ice makers in your freezer. But something tells me that the conditions in someone's freezer are not analogous to the conditions on the North and South Poles.
Is that right? Oh. Now, it is true that you can see these little lines near the surface at the top and even down into the middle, but once you get down in the middle, the pressure of the ice is so great that those lines simply become invisible, and after that it's just, subjective judgment and so forth.
They don't become invisible, but it does become hard to visually date them. In fact, dating ice cores simply by counting layers has been determined by comparing it to other methods to be the least accurate dating method, and so generally would not be relied upon as the sole dating method for any given core sample.
And they'll tell you that these little lines in the polar ice caps, those are just like annual rings in a tree. You cut down a tree, you count the rings, and they say, oh, well, you can see 220,000 lines. They're just like tree rings and so forth. So this tells us that the polar ice caps are 220,000, years old.
It's not exactly like tree ring dating, but it is similar. And visual stratigraphy, that is the method of dating them by counting the layers, is only accurate up to about 50 or 60,000 years. And then it's confirmed by other dating methods including radiometric dating, geochemistry, electrical conductivity, numerical flow modeling, and more. Now next he gets into the squadron of planes that made an emergency landing in Greenland during World War II. He takes a really long time just to say, bunch of planes landed there in the 40s and were buried by 82 meters or 268 feet of ice in 50 years, so I'm skipping most of his story about it.
These planes are not heavy enough to sink into the ice. Wherever they landed is where they stayed, okay? So they crash landed in 1942. Planes stay exactly where they landed.
Not true. They landed on an active glacier and as such had migrated a significant distance from their landing site. This is why it took them so long to find the planes. They started searching in 1988 but didn't find them until 1992. This is also where your problem with ice layers comes in. You see, when we take ice core samples, we don't take them from active glaciers because there's too much disruption to the ice. We take them from stable ice fields like Greenland's interior, which also happens to get a lot less snow than the coastal areas like the one where the planes landed. Now I'm skipping more because he still hasn't even gotten to how deep they were buried yet. I just felt the need to point out that they were not stationary during the 50 years between their loss and rediscovery.
It only took 46 years for 250 feet of ice and snow to pile up on top. That's 5.4 foot per year, is that correct? I don't think those little lines in the polar ice caps are annual rings. I don't think those are years. I think those little lines are individual storms. That would be much more reasonable, wouldn't it?
Did you guys see his little trick there? He transitioned almost seamlessly between talking about ice layers and then pointing out how many feet of ice there were. Now, as I pointed out earlier, it was on an active glacier, so if there were layers, it would not necessarily have been accurate, but it is still very disingenuous to start by talking about ice layers and then transition to talking about ice depth without mentioning how it relates to layers. And no, individual storms do not make new layers. The reason there are layers is because in the summer months, the ice on the surface melts just a little bit, and when it refreezes in the winter, it's more clear than the winter ice that just stays frozen the whole time. An individual snowstorm does not cause the surface to melt like that, it just piles on more accumulation, making the layer thicker. It is the winter-summer cycle that forms the layers. There are events that can cause more than one layer in one winter-summer cycle, but such a disruption leaves behind evidence, and these are accounted for when we date the layers.
Oh. Now this is a picture of the Upper Grand Canyon of Arizona. And here you see hundreds and hundreds of layers of rock, right? I mean, it's a beautiful area. Now, evolutionists would tell you that these layers could span millions and millions, even hundreds of millions of years, but I would like you to think about it something for just a second. First of all those layers you see here are sedimentary rock.
Really? All of them? Even the igneous lava flows? That's a neat trick, having igneous rock be sedimentary rock.
Now, what is sedimentary rock? Well, it comes from the word sediment, correct? So if I had a glass of water here and I threw dirt and sand into the water, whatever settles to the bottom would be called sediment, correct?
Yeah, so far so good.
So sedimentary rock is a water deposit rock.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this, but that's not correct. Wind can deposit sediment too. Sedimentary rock is rock that has been cemented either with water or pressure. But there are many different types of depositional environments. There are continental, transitional, and marine, and within these headings there are several subheadings such as deltaic, fluvial, aeolian, carbonate shelf, shallow marine clastic, beach, and more. Yes, most of these do involve water. But of the 14 types of depositional environments that I read about, only one involved flooding. And it doesn't even exclusively involve flooding. Alluvial deposits can also be the result of intermittent streams. So to oversimplify all this down to, it was the water which done did it, therefore Noah's flood, is incredibly disingenuous.
You remember from school there's only three kinds of rock: igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary.
Oh, so you do know that there's a difference between igneous and sedimentary rock. Well done. But also, there's not just three types of rock. Those are three categories of rock, all of which have plenty of subcategories.
All these layers of rock you see here are sedimentary rock.
Except for the ones that aren't, like the granite or the lava flows.
What you really see here are just layers of dried out mud. That's everything you see here. These are just layers of dried out mud.
At this point, I think I would like to get the geologist that I've been having help me with this video weigh in himself. So, Stephen, what do you have to say to this claim?
Bullshit, 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 and more bullshit!
Thank you, Stephen.
And I say it takes just 1 year to cut that canyon. That these are just the wet mud layers laid down by the flood of Noah, that this whole canyon was cut in just 1 year.
And I assume you have supporting evidence for this viewpoint, not just an unsubstantiated claim about how torrential floodwaters somehow carved a lazy, meandering river? And how did the layering happen if it were all one depositional event? I know the typical creationist reply to this is the hydrologic sorting thing, but then the sedimentary layers with the biggest grains of sediment would be at the bottom, with the smaller grain ones at the top, which is not the case. But also, it wouldn't be layered, it would be a gradient. The layers are formed when rock lithifies, a process that can be quick for some types of rock, but can take millions of years for others. But to think that lithification of all the different types of rock found in the Grand Canyon would have happened over the span of a single year is just ridiculous.
Now, of course, you could argue with that.
Yes, I could. Very easily, in fact.
Now, if you were to believe that all these layers came from individual floods, you would have to believe that about 1,000 floods of roughly equal depth occurred one after the other exactly the same way, covering hundreds of thousands of square miles.
Nope, that is not what anyone thinks. Where did you get the idea that every layer is from an identical flood type event? And here I'll also ask the question, what do you mean by layer? Is it a lamination, which are small millimeters thick layers found within the sedimentary rocks, which can only happen in relatively still water environments? Now, you can call me crazy, but a violent flood that swept across the entire Earth over the course of one single year does not strike me as a still water environment. The Grand Canyon has millions of laminations, but let's be generous and say there are only 1 million. In order for 1 million laminations to form in the year-long flood, there would have had to have been 2,740 new laminations deposited and lithified every single day. That's 2 laminations every minute. In a violent flood, that is not the kind of environment that is conducive to the formation of laminations.
Now, does that even seem acceptable?
Nope, it sure doesn't. Oh wait, you weren't talking about what I just said, you were talking about your straw man of how the layers were deposited. But yeah, that does not seem acceptable either. The most reasonable conclusion is the one that geologists already know. Most of the layers of the Grand Canyon were deep marine layers formed over hundreds of millions of years and uplifted by tectonic activity, then carved through by the Colorado River.
That's a little tough, right? And I would like you to think about something with me for a minute. A good scientist always asks 2 questions. The first question is, what's there? Meaning, when I make a scientific observation, I have to adequately and accurately describe what is present, what is there.
And since you seem to be going out of your way to make sure that your audience are not getting an accurate or adequate description of what's there, my conclusion is that your talk is not very scientific. And that's a massive understatement.
But the second and more important question in science is, what is not there?
And one of the answers to that question with regards to the Grand Canyon is evidence for a worldwide flood just 4,000 years ago. That's all the time I have for this guy today. He does go on to make a couple more points, and I did skip over a couple, so go watch his video if you want to make sure I'm not being dishonest and skipping over his best material. I assure you, I'm not, but, go ahead and verify that. Also, huge thanks to Stephen Bauman, who is the geologist who helped me out with this video. Geology is a bit of a weak spot of mine, so I appreciate not having to hunt down references for everything all by myself. I'll link to the video he sent me. He actually does deal with the points that I'm skipping, and he gets into a bit more technical detail with it. And I'm going to miss out on the comment of the day today in favor of pointing out some dishonesty on the part of Answers in Genesis with regards to the Grand Canyon. Now, I know dishonesty from AIG is truly shocking, but bear with me, this one's actually kind of fun. So here is their picture on their article about rock layers bending without fracturing. Now here's a picture of the same spot from a slightly different angle from the USGS. If we put them side by side, what do we see? Well, here where the person in the pink shirt is sitting in the AIG photo, we can see a fracture in the USGS photo. And here where this person is walking in the AIG photo, we can see another fracture in the USGS photo. There's a third person off to the left in the AIG photo, but that part isn't visible in the USGS photo, so I can't confirm that there is a fracture behind them, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least. The best part about this, though, is that these fractures are not what dismantles AIG's points with the bendy rocks, because they are still bent more than what you would normally think possible for brittle rocks, even taking those fractures into consideration. What dismantles this point is the fact that the rocks are more pliable when they are under pressure or subject to heat, as these rocks would have been when they did their bending. But despite the fact that they still look ridiculously bent, AIG still felt the need to hide the fact that they are fractured in order to make their point, and then lie about it in their article. So that's fun. Links for social media and ways to support the channel are in the description, and remember, my patrons get access to my videos a day in advance, so see you next time.